As with the previous scene, the naming and honoring of the chosen one, the sources disagree about the gendering of the evocation of the ancestors. Kraft, Stravinsky's mouthpiece in his later years, imagines both scenes as written for male dancers, with the young men dancing throughout, joined by the elders toward the end of the evocation. At rehearsal 125, the elders appear, and at number 128, squat before the sacred circle like a court of judges. But the Hodson-Nijinsky choreography, based on extensive contemporary documentation, has both scenes as danced by the young women, with the old men coming onto the stage only toward the end of evocation. Indeed, the young men do not appear at all in the entirety of Part 2. There is a practical logic to that view. There are a limited number of male dancers, and they need to recostume as elders for the final scenes of the ballet. For practical, dramatic, and musical reasons, I think Hodson is right. Either way, evocation is in a religious expressive mode. The melody is chant-like in its murmured melodic oscillations, an incantation hypnotic in its repetitions. The larger setting evokes a religious procession. Companion pieces from earlier in the ballet are the Procession in Spring Rounds and the Procession of the Oldest and Wisest. The tempo is slow, with a steady quarter-note pulsation throughout. In the compositional sketches, Stravinsky thought of this scene's tempo as maestoso, and generally he performed it that way, more of a solemn procession than a murmured chant. The dramatic role of the scene is to place a religious imprimatur on the ritual sacrifice, which is encouraged by the women, but ultimately enforced by the old men, the sages, the elders, and the ancestors. It is an epitome of patriarchal oppression and violence, channeled through religious ritual in an atmosphere that is spiritual, otherworldly, religious, and, in its evocation of the dead, superhuman. The scene is divided into 4 blocks, each of which has 2 components: a bass blast, 3 quick, loud low notes for brass, timpani, and lower strings, and a chant with diatonic planing accompaniment. The accompaniment lends a chorale-like or hymn-like atmosphere, and there are aspects of a religious procession. In the Hodson-Nijinsky choreography, the women fall to the ground at each blast to evoke ancestral spirits as witnesses for her dance. They rise and circle around the chosen one during the more extended processions that follow each blast. Block 1 consists of a brass blast, followed by a chant melody, an alternation of 2 tones. The melody is fleshed out as a sort of religious chorale or a slow, march-like procession. The harmonic layer consists of a single line in octaves, played triple forte low in the bass. Initially, it is a descending minor third, F sharp, E, D sharp, a repeat in a new register and expressive content of the same gesture in the main melody of the previous scene. A moment later, the bass moves to include G, replicating the full 4-note melody I've been calling naming and honoring 1. As a bass line, these notes have a different effect, however, suggesting E-flat as a principal harmonic tone, supported by incomplete E-flat minor or E-flat major triads. Here is the end of naming and honoring, moving directly into the beginning of evocation. The melodic layer features the simplest melody we have yet encountered. The young women's chant is just an alternation, a stuttering oscillation, of 2 notes, C and D. It is connected with other prominent melodies that also move within a whole tone. The melody is amplified by a relatively consonant and entirely diatonic planing accompaniment. The primary harmony that results is A minor. The melodic C is embellished by its upper neighbor D. The bass A is embellished by both upper and lower neighbors G and B flat. The result is an accordion-like oscillation between A minor and G minor chords. The total effect is that of a religious chorale. The focus on A links this back to two prominent earlier moments in the ballet, the pastoral opening folk melody and the violent military opening of the previous scene, the naming and honoring of the chosen one. The shared focus on A provides a fixed lens on the shifting expressive mode. Toward the end of the final movement, the sacrificial dance, we will find a final reference to A in that climactic, wild dance of death. The melodic layer and the harmonic layer are oriented towards structural perfect fifths that are related by tritone. Block 2 is an abbreviated soft echo of Block 1, with the same chant-like alternation of C and D in the melody, the same A-centered planing accompaniment, and the same bass outburst at the beginning of the block. Taking blocks 1 and 2 together, we can begin to grasp the metrical regularity of this procession lurking just behind the evident changes of meter. The basic metrical unit is two measures of 4/4, with the neighbor note C-D-C heard at a higher level. The 3/4 measures in the music result from truncation of the prototypical 4-beat measures. The elements in Block 3 are the same as in the first two blocks: a melody that alternates C and D, a planing accompaniment that is oriented toward an A minor triad, a harmony layer oriented toward E flat major or E flat minor, with the familiar F sharp ED prefix. But the chant melody is now extended upward from CD to move within a CG frame. As a result, there are now three structural fifths at play: E flat, B flat in the harmony layer, A, E in the planing accompaniment, C, G in the extended melody. Although it may seem a stretch, that particular complex of harmonies seems to recall the octatonic festival of chords at the beginning of the ritual of abduction. The affective impact could not be more different, however. We We can continue to trace the internal repetitions of the melody in relation to the two-measure prototype established at the beginning. The two-bar units are faithfully maintained, although with internal variations, as befits this religious procession. According to Kraft, this is the moment when the elders appear. The chosen one remains motionless, as she does throughout this scene and the previous one. The ritual procession circles around her, and the sage and elders confirm their final judgment. E flat continues as a pedal in the bass. The melody continues to focus on CD, now compressed from the CG frame in the previous block to CD E flat. The planing accompaniment continues, still oriented toward the A minor triad. The chant melody continues to move within its tight two-bar rhythmic frame. The melody, mostly a chant-like alternation of two notes, C and D, and the rhythm, a narrow, constrained two-bar hypermeter, together create a sense of narrow confinement. The chosen one is trapped without any hope of escape. The final measure of the scene functions as a brief transition to the next scene. According to Kraft, this is the moment when the elders squat before the sacred circle. The new tempo begins with an offbeat bass ostinato on B flat, heard beneath continuing A minor harmony. The harmony is a familiar type, minor triad with semitone distractor, arranged with the distractor in the bass. The distractor, B flat, becomes the centric tone in the following scene, the ritual action of the ancestors. This is a process we saw previously in the transition from mystic circle to naming and honoring of the chosen one. Harmonies that consist of a minor triad with a dissonant distractor, a semitone above the root, are prevalent in this portion of the ballet.